Good evening. We start the penultimate section of Evening War's Decline and Fall. Part 3. Chapter 1. Stone walls do not a prison make. Paul's trial, which took place some weeks later at the Old Bailey, was a bitter disappointment to the public. The news, and the jury, and the counsel concerned. The arrest at the Ritz. The announcement at St. Margaret's that the wedding was postponed. Margot's flight to Corfu, the refusal of bail, the meals sent in to Paul on covered dishes from Boulsteins had been front-page stories every day. After all this, Paul's conviction and sentence were a lame conclusion. At first he pleaded guilty on all charges, despite the entreaties of his counsel, but eventually he was galvanized into some show of defense by the warning of the presiding judge that the law allowed for the punishment of the cat o' nine tails for offences of this sort. Even then things were very flat. Potts, as chief witness for the prosecution, was unshakable, and was later warmly commended by the court. No evidence except of previous good conduct was offered by the defence. Margot Beast Chetwynd's name was not mentioned, though the judge in passing sentence remarked that no one could be ignorant of the callous insolence with which, on the very eve of the arrest for this most infamous crimes, the accused had been preparing to join his name with one honoured in his country's history, and to drag down to his own pitiable depths of depravity a lady of beauty, rank, and stainless reputation. The just censure of society, marked the judge, is accorded to those so inconstant and intemperate that they must take their pleasures in the unholy market of humanity that still sullies the fame of our civilization. But for the traders themselves, these human vampires who prey upon the degradation of their species, society had reserved the right of ruthless suppression. So Paul was sent off to prison, and the papers headed the column they reserved for home events of minor importance with "Prison for Ex-Society Bridegroom, Judge on Human Vampires," and there, as far as the public were concerned, the matter ended. Before this happened, however, a conversation took place which deserves the attention of all interested in the confused series of events of which Paul had become a part. One day, while he was waiting for trial, he was visited in his cell by Peter Beast Chetwynd. "Hello," he said. "Hello, Paul," said Peter. "Mamma asked me to come in to see you. She wants to know if you're getting the food all right she's ordered for you. I hope you like it, because I chose most of it myself. I thought you wouldn't want anything very heavy." "It's splendid," said Paul. "How's Margot?" "Well, that's rather what I've come to tell you, Paul. Margot's gone away." "Where to?" "She's gone off alone to Corfu. I made her, though she wanted to stay and see your trial. You can imagine what a time we've had with reporters and people. You don't think it awful of her, do you? And listen, there's something else." "Can that policeman hear?" "It's this. You must remember that awful man Maltravers. Well, you've probably seen he's Home Secretary now. He's been round to Mama in the most impossible Oppenheim kind of way and said that if she'd marry him, he could get you out. Of course, he's obviously been reading books, but Mama thinks it's probably true. And she wants to know how you feel about it. She rather feels the whole thing's her fault, really, and short of going to prison herself, she'll do anything she can to help you. You can't imagine Mama in prison, can you? Well, would you rather get out now and her marry Maltravers, or wait until you do get out and marry her yourself?" She was rather definite about it. Paul thought of Professor Silenus. In 10 years, she will be worn out. But he said, "I'd rather she waited if you think she possibly can." "I thought you'd say that, Paul. I'm so glad." Mama said, "I won't say I don't know how I shall ever be able to make up for this, because I think he knows I can." Those were her words. I don't suppose you'll get more than a year or so, will you? Good Lord, I hope not, said Paul. His sentence was 7 years, penal servitude, and was rather a blow. In 10 years she will be worn out, thought, as he drove into the prison van to Blackstock Jail. On his first day there, Paul met quite a number of people, some of whom he already knew. The first person was a warder with a low brow and distinctly menacing manner. He wrote Paul's name in the body receipt book with some difficulty and then conducted him to a cell. He had evidently been reading the papers. Rather different from the Ritz Hotel, eh? He said. We don't like your kind here, see? We knows how to treat 'em. You won't find nothing like the Ritz here, you dirty white slaver. But there he was wrong, because the next person Paul met was Philbrick. His prison clothes were ill-fitting, and his chin was unshaven. But he still bore an indefinable air of the grand manner. Thought I'd be seeing you soon, he said. They've put me up to reception bath cleaner, me being an old hand. I've been saving the best suit I can find for you. Not a louse on it. Hardly. He threw a little pile of clothes stamped with a broad arrow onto the bench. The warder returned with another, apparently his superior officer. Together they made a careful inventory of all Paul's possessions. Shoes, brown, 1 pair. Socks, fancy, 1 pair. Suspenders, black silk, 1 pair, read out the warder in a sing-song voice. Never saw a bloke with so much clothes. There were several checks due to difficulties of spelling, and it was some time before the list was finished. Cigarette case, white metal containing 2 cigarettes. Watch, white metal. Tie pin, fancy. It had cost Margot considerable more than the warder earned each year, had he only known. Studs, bone, 1 pair. Cufflinks, fancy, 1 pair. The officer looked doubtfully at Paul's gold cigar piercer, the gift of the best man. What's this here? It's for cigars, said Paul. Not so much lip, said the warder, banging him on the top of his head with the pair of shoes he happened to be holding. Put it down as instrument. That's the lot, he said. Unless you've got false teeth, you're allowed to keep them, only we must make note of it. No, said Paul. Truss or other surgical appliance? No, said Paul. All right, you can go to the bath. Paul sat for the regulation 10 minutes in the regulation 9 inches of warm water, which smelt reassuringly of disinfectant. Then he put on his prison clothes. The loss of his personal possessions gave him a curiously agreeable sense of irresponsibility. You look a treat, said Philbrick. Next he saw the medical officer, who sat at a table covered with official forms. Name, said the doctor. Pennyfeather. Have you at any time been detained in a mental home or similar institution? If so, give particulars. I was at Scone College, Oxford, said Paul. The doctor looked up for the first time. Don't you dare make jokes here, my man, he said, or I'll soon have you in the straitjacket in less than no time. Sorry, Paul. Don't speak to the medical officer unless to answer a question, said the warder at his elbow. Sorry, said Paul unconsciously, and was banged on the head. Suffering from consumption, VD, or any contagious disease? Asked the M.O. Not that I know of, said Paul. That's all, said the doctor. I have certified you as capable of undergoing the usual descriptions of punishments as specified below, to wit, restraint of handcuffs, leg chains, cross irons, body belt, canvas dress, close confinement. Number 1, diet. Number 2, diet, birch rod, and cat o' nine tails. Any complaints? But must I have all these at once? Asked Paul, rather dismayed. You will if you ask impertinent questions. Look after that man, officer. He's obviously a troublesome character. Come here, you, said the warder. They went up a passage and down 2 flights of iron steps. Long galleries with iron railings stretched out in each direction, giving access to innumerable doors. Wire netting was stretched across the landings. So you don't pull no monkey tricks. Suicide isn't allowed in this prison, see? Said the warder. This is your cell. Keep it clean, or you'll know the reason why. And this is your number. He buttoned a yellow badge under Paul's coat. Like a flag day, said Paul. "Shut up, you," remarked the warder, and locked the door. "Suppose I shall learn to respect these people in time," thought Paul. "They all seem much less awe-inspiring than anyone I've ever met." His next visit was from the schoolmaster. The door was unlocked, and a seedy-looking young man in a tweed suit came into the cell. "Can you read and write, D412? asked the newcomer. "Yes," said Paul. "Public or secondary education?" "Public," said Paul. His school had been rather sensitive on this subject. "What was your standard when you left school?" "Well, I don't quite know. I don't think we had standards." The schoolmaster marked him down as memory defective on a form and went out. Presently he returned with a book. "You must do your best with that for the next 4 weeks," he said. "I'll try and get you into one of the morning classes. You won't find it difficult if you can read fairly easily. You see, it begins there," he said helpfully, showing Paul the first page. It was an English grammar published in 1872. "Syllable is a single sound made by one simple effort of the voice," Paul read. "Thank you," he said. "I'm sure I shall find it useful." "You can change it after 4 weeks if you can get on with it," said the schoolmaster. "But I should stick to it if you can." Again the door was locked. Next came the chaplain. "Here's your Bible and a book of devotion. The Bible stays in the cell always. You can change the book of devotion any week you wish to. Are you Church of England? Services are voluntary. That is to say, you must either attend all or none." The chaplain spoke in a nervous and hurried manner. He was new to his job, and he had already visited 50 prisoners that day, one of whom had delayed him for a long time with descriptions of a vision he had seen the night before. "Hello, Prendy," said Paul. Mr. Prendergast looked at him anxiously. "I didn't recognize you," he said. "People look so much alike in those clothes." "This is most disturbing, Pennyfeather. As soon as I saw that you'd been convicted, I was afraid they might send you here." Oh dear. It makes everything still more difficult." "What's the matter, Prendy? Doubts again?" No, discipline, my old trouble. I've only been at the job a week. I was very lucky to get it. My bishop said he thought there was more opening for a modern churchman in this kind of work than in the parishes. The governor is very modern, too. But the criminals are just as bad as the boys. I find they often pretend to make confessions and tell me the most dreadful things, just to see what I'll say. And in chapel they can laugh so much that the warders spend all their time correcting them. Makes the services seem so irrelevant. Several of them got put on number 1 diet this morning for singing the wrong words to one of the hymns. And of course, that only makes me more unpopular. Please, Pennyfeather, if you don't mind, you mustn't call me Prendy. And if anyone passes the cell, will you stand up when you're talking to me? You're supposed to, you see. And the chief warder has said some very severe things to me about maintaining discipline. At this moment, the face of the warder appeared at the peephole in the door. "I trust you realise the enormity of the offence of your justice of your punishment," said Mr. Prendergast in a loud voice. "Pray for penitence." A warder came into the cell. "Sorry to disturb you, sir, but I've got to take this one to see the governor. There's D418 down the way, been asking for you for days. I said I'd tell you, only if you'll forgive me my saying so, I shouldn't be too soft with him, sir. We know him of old. He's a sly old devil. Begging your pardon, sir. And he's only religious when he thinks it'll pay." "I think I'm the person to decide that, officer," said Mr. Prendergast with some dignity. "You may take D412 to the governor." Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery had not been intended by nature or education for the governor of a prison. His appointment was the idea of a Labour Home Secretary, who had been impressed by an appendix on the theory of penology, which he had contributed to a report on the treatment of conscientious objectors. Up to that time, Sir Wilfrid had held the chair of sociology at a Midland university. Only his intimate friends and a few specially favoured pupils knew that, behind his mild and professional exterior, he concealed an ardent ambition to serve in the public life of his generation. He stood twice for Parliament, but so diffidently that his candidature passed almost unnoticed. Colonel MacAdder, his predecessor in office, a veteran of numberless unrecorded campaigns on the Afghan frontier, had said to him upon his retirement, "Good luck, Sir Wilfrid. If I may give you a piece of advice, it is this. Don't bother about the lower warders of the prison. Give hell to the man immediately below you, and you can rely on him to pass it on with interest. If you make prison bad enough, people will take a jolly good care to keep out of it. That's been my policy all through, and I'm proud of it." Policy which soon became quite famous in the society of Cheltenham Spa. Sir Wilfrid, however, had his own ideas. "You must understand," he said to Paul, "that 'tis my aim to establish personal contact with each of the men under my care. I want you to take a pride in your prison and your work here. So far as possible, I like the prisoners to carry on with their avocations in civilized life. What was this man's profession, officer?" "White slave traffic, sir." "Ah, yes. Well, I'm afraid you won't have much opportunity for that here. What else have you done?" "I was nearly a clergyman once," said Paul. "Indeed. Well, I hope in time, if I find enough men with the same intention, to get together a theological class. You've no doubt met the chaplain, a very broad-minded man. Still, for the present, we are only at the beginning. The government regulations are rather uncompromising. The first 4 weeks you will have to observe the solitary confinement ordained by law. After that we will find you something more creative. We don't want you to feel that your personality is being stamped out. Have you any experience of art leather work?" "No, sir." "Well, I might put you into the arts and crafts workshop. I came to the conclusion many years ago that almost all crime is due to the repressed desire for aesthetic expression. At last, we have the opportunity for testing it. Are you an extrovert or an introvert?" "Afraid I'm not sure, sir." "So few people are. I'm trying to induce the Home Office to install an official psychoanalyst. Do you read the New Nation, I wonder? There is a rather flattering article this week about our prison called the Lucas Dockery Experiments. I like the prisoners to know these things. It gives them corporate pride. I may give you one small example of the work we are doing that affects your own case. Up till now, all offences connected with prostitution have been put into the sexual category. Now I hold that an offence of your kind is essentially acquisitive and shall grade it accordingly. It does not, of course, make any difference as far as your conditions of imprisonment are concerned. The routine of penal servitude is prescribed by standing orders. But you see what a difference it makes to the annual statistics." "The human touch," said Wilfrid, after Paul had been led from the room. "Sure makes all the difference. You could see with that unfortunate man just now what a difference it made to him to think that, far from being a mere nameless slave, he now has become part of a great revolution in statistics." "Yes, sir," said the chief warder. "And by the way, there are 2 more attempted suicides being brought up tomorrow. You must really be more strict with them, sir. Those sharp tools you've issued to the Arts and Crafts crew is just putting temptation in men's way." Paul was once more locked in, and for the first time had the opportunity of examining his cell. There was little to interest him, besides his Bible, his book of devotion, prayers on various occasions of illness, uncertainty, and loss by the Reverend Septimus Bede, M.A. Edinburgh 1863, and his English grammar. There were a little glazed pint pot, a knife and spoon, a slate and slate pencil, a salt jar, a metal water can, 2 earthenware vessels, and some cleaning materials, a plank bed upright against the wall, a roll of bedding, a stool, and a table. A printed notice informed him that he was not permitted to look out of the window. 3 printed cards on the wall contained a list of other punishable offences, which seemed to include every human activity, some Church of England prayers, and an explanation of the system of progressive stages. There was also a typewritten thought for the day, one of Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery's little innovations. The message for the first day of Paul's imprisonment was, "Sense of sin is sense of waste," the editor of the Sunday Express. Paul studied the system of progressive stages with interest. After 4 weeks, he read, he would be allowed to join in associated labour, to take half an hour's exercise on Sundays, to wear a stripe on his arm, if illiterate, to have school instructions, to take one work of fiction from the library weekly, and, if special application were made to the governor, to exhibit 4 photographs of his relatives or approved friends after 8 weeks. Provided that his conduct was perfectly satisfactory, he might receive a visit of 20 minutes duration, and write and receive a letter. 6 weeks later, he might receive another visit and another letter and another library book weekly. Would Davy Lennox's picture of the back of Margot's head be accepted as a photograph of an approved friend, he wondered. After a time, his door was unlocked again and opened a few inches. A hand thrust in a tin, and a voice said, "Pint pot, quick!" Paul's mug was filled with cocoa, and the door was locked again. The tin contained bread, bacon, and beans. That was the last interruption for 14 hours. Paul fell into a reverie. It was the first time he had really been alone for months. How very refreshing it was, he reflected. The next 4 weeks of solitary confinement were among the happiest of Paul's life. The physical comforts were certainly meagre, but at the Ritz Paul had learned to appreciate the inadequacy of purely physical comfort. It was so exhilarating, he found, never to have to make any decision on any subject, to be wholly relieved from the smallest consideration of time, meals, or clothes, to have no anxiety about what kind of impression he was making. In fact, to be free. At some rather chilly time in the morning, a bell would ring and the warder would say, "Slops outside." He would rise, roll up his bedding, and dress. There was no need to shave, no hesitation about what tie he should wear, none of the fidgeting with studs and collars and links that so distracts the waking moments of a civilized man. He felt like the happy people in the advertisement for shaving soap, who seemed to have achieved very simply that peace of mind so distant and so desirable in the early morning. For about an hour he stitched his way at a mailbag until his door was again unlocked to admit a hand with a lump of bread and a large ladle of porridge. After breakfast he gave a cursory polish to the furniture and crockery of his cell and did some more sewing until the bell rang for chapel. For a quarter of an hour or 20 minutes he heard Mr. Prendergast blaspheming against the beauties of 16th century diction. This was certainly a bore, and so was the next hour, during which he had to march around the prison square, where between concentric paths of worn asphalt a few melancholy cabbages showed their heads. Some of the men during this period used to fall out under the pretence of tying a shoelace and take furtive bites at the leaves of the vegetables. If observed, they were severely punished. Paul never felt any temptation to do this. After that, the day was unbroken save for luncheon, supper, and the governor's inspection. The heap of sacking, which every day he was to turn into mailbags, was supposed by law to keep him busy for 9 hours. The prisoners in the cells on either side of him, who were not quite in their right minds, the warder told Paul, found some difficulty in finishing their tasks before light out. Paul found that with the least exertion he had finished long before supper, and spent the evenings in meditation and writing on his slate the thoughts which had occurred to him during the day. Chapter 2. The Lucas Dockery Experiments. Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery, as has already been suggested, combined ambition, scholarship, and genuine optimism in a degree rarely found in his office. He looked forward to a time when the Lucas Dockery experiments should be recognized as the beginning of a new epoch in penology, and he rehearsed in his mind sentences from the social histories of the future which would contain such verdict as, "One of the few important events of this Labour government's brief tenure in power was the appointment as governor of Blackstone Gaol of Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery. The administration of this intrepid and far-seeing official is justly regarded as the foundation of the present system of criminal treatment. In fact, it may be safely said that no single man occupies so high a place in the history of social reform of his century, etc., etc., etc. His eminent qualities, however, did not keep him from many severe differences of opinion with the chief warder. He was sitting in his study one day, working at a memorandum for the prison commissioners, one of the neglected series of memoranda whose publication after his retirement indicated Sir Wilfrid's claim to be the pioneer of artificial sunlight in prisons, when the chief warder interrupted him. "A bad report from the bookbinding shop, sir. The instructor says that a practice is growing among men of eating the paste issued to them for their work. They say it is preferable to the porridge. We shall either have to put another warder to supervise the bookbinding or introduce something into the paste which makes it unpalatable, sir." "Has the paste any nutritive value?" asked Sir Wilfrid. "Couldn't say, sir. Weigh the men in the bookbinding shop, and then report to me any increase in weight. How many times must I ask you to ascertain all the facts before reporting on any case?" "Very good, sir. And there's a petition from D412. He's finished his 4-month solitary, and he wants to know if he can keep at it for another 4. Disapprove of cellular labour. Makes a man an introvert. Who is D412? Long sentence, sir, waiting transfer to Egdon. I'll see D412 myself." "Very good, sir." Paul was led in. "I understand you wish to continue cellular labour instead of availing yourselves of the privilege of working in association. Why is that?" "I find it so much more interesting, sir," said Paul. "'Tis a most irregular suggestion," said the chief warder. "Privileges can only be forfeited by a breach of the regulations witnessed and attested by 2 officers. Standing orders most emphatic on the subject. I wonder whether you have narcissistic tendencies," said the governor. "The Home Office has not as yet come to any decision about my application for a staff psychoanalyst." "Put him in the observation cell," said the chief warder. "That brings out any insanity. I've known several cases of men you could hardly have told were mad, just eccentric, you know, who've been put on observation, and after a few days they'd be raving lunatics. Colonel McAdder was a great believer in the observation cell, sir." "Did you lead a very lonely life before conviction? Perhaps you were a shepherd or a lighthouse keeper, or something of the kind?" "No, sir." "Most curious. Well, I will consider your case and give you my answer later." Paul was led back to his cell, and the next day was again summoned before the governor. "I have considered your application," said Sir Wilfrid, "with the most minute care. In fact, I have decided to include it in my forthcoming work on the criminal mind. Perhaps you would like to hear what I have written about you." "Case R," he read. "A young man of respectable family and some education, no previous criminal record. Committed to 7 years penal servitude for traffic in prostitution. Upon completing his first 4 months, R petitioned for extension of cellular labour. Treatment as prescribed by standing orders, either A, detention in observation cell for medical officer to satisfy himself about the state of prisoner's mind, or B, compulsory work in association with other prisoners, unless privilege forfeited by misdemeanour. Treatment by Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery. I decided that R was suffering from misanthropic tendencies induced by a sense of his own inferiority in the presence of others. R's crime was the result of an attempt to assert individuality at the expense of community. CP cases D, G, and I. Accordingly, I attempted to break down his social intermissions by a series of progressive steps. In the first stage, he exercised daily for half an hour in the company of other prisoners. Conversation was allowed during this period upon approved topics: history, philosophy, public events, etc., the prisoners being chosen among those whose crimes would tend as little as possible to aggregate and encourage ours. I have not yet thought of the other stages of your treatment, but you can see that individual attention is being paid to your reclamation. It may cause you some gratification to realize that, thanks to my report, you may in time become a case of scientific interest throughout the world. So Wilfrid Lucas Dockery's treatment of Case R may happily become a precedent for generations yet unborn. That is something to lift you above the soul-destroying monotony of routine, is it not? Paul was led away. The men in the kitchen have lodged a complaint that they cannot work with C29, said the chief warder. They say he has an infectious skin disease all over his hands. I can't be worried with things like that, said the governor, irritably. I'm trying to decide upon case R's. I mean D412's third stage of reclamation. Case R of the Lucas Dockery experiments began on the new regime that afternoon. Come out, said the warder, unlocking his cell, and bring your at. The parade ground, empty of its revolving squads, looked particularly desolate. Stand there, and don't move until I come back, said the warder. Presently he returned with a little bony figure in prison dress. This is your pal, he said. This is the path you've got to walk. Neither of you is to touch one another or any part of his clothing. Nothing is to be passed from one another. You are to keep at a distance of 1 yard and talk history, philosophy, or kindred subjects. When I rings the bell, you stops talking, see? Your pace is to be neither quicker nor slower than average walking pace. Them's the governor's instructions, and God help you if you does anything wrong. Now walk. This is a silly dodge, said the little man. I've been in 6 prisons. I've never seen nothing to touch it. Most irregular. He doesn't know where you are these days. This blinking prison is going to the dogs. Look at the chaplain. Wears a wig. Are you here for long? Asked Paul politely. Not this time. I couldn't get a proper charge against me. 6 months for loitering with intent. They've been watching me for weeks, but I wasn't going to let them have a chance this time. Now, in 6 months is a very decent little sentence. Take my meaning. One picks up with old friends, and you like it all the more when it comes out. I never mind 6 months. What's more, I'm known here. I'm always gets made landing cleaner. I expect you've seen my hand often enough coming round with the grub. The warders knows me, you see, so they always keep a job open for me if they hears I'm coming back. If you're nice to them first 2 or 3 times you're here, they'll probably do the same for you. Is it a very good job? Well, not as jobs go, but it's a nice start. Best job of all is reception cleaner. One doesn't get that for years unless you've got special recommendations. You see, you has all the people coming in fresh from outside, and you hears all the news and gets tobacco sometimes and racing tips. Did you see the cleaner when you came in? Know who he is? Well, yes, said Paul. As a matter of fact, I do. He's called Philbrick. No, old man, you got the wrong chap. I mean a big stout man, talks a lot about hotels and restaurants. Yes, that's the man I mean. Why, don't you know who that is? That's the governor's brother, Sir Solomon Lucas Dockery. Told me so himself. Here for arson, burnt a castle in Wales. You can see he's a toff. Chapter 3. The Death of a Modern Churchman. Some days later, Paul entered on another phase of his reclamation. When he came into the prison square for his afternoon exercise, he found that his companion's place had been taken by a burly man of formidable aspect. He had red hair and a beard, and red-rimmed eyes, and vast red hands which twirled convulsively at his sides. He turned his ox-like eyes on Paul and gave him a slight snarl of welcome. "You're a new pal," said the warder. "Get on with it." "How do you do?" said Paul politely. "Are you here for long?" "Life," said the other. "But it doesn't matter much. I look daily for the second coming." They marched in silence. "Do you think this is a good plan of the governor's?" asked Paul. "Yes," said his companion. They walked on in silence once more, twice round, 3 times round. "Talk, you two," shouted the warder. "That's your instructions. Talk." "Makes a change," said the big man. "What are you here for?" asked Paul. "You don't mind me asking, do you?" "It's all in the Bible, big man. You should read it about it in there. Figuratively, you know," he added. "It wouldn't be plain to you, I don't suppose, not like it is to me." "Not an easy book to understand, is it?" "It's not understanding that's needed, it's visions. Do you ever have visions?" "No, I'm afraid I don't." "Nor does the chaplain. He's no Christian. It was a vision what brought me here, an angel clothed in flame, with a crown of flame on his head, crying, 'Kill and spare not. The kingdom is at hand.' Would you like to hear about it? I'll tell you. I'm a carpenter by profession, or at least I was, you understand." He spoke a curious blend of Cockney and biblical English. "Not a joiner, a cabinet maker. Well, one day I was just sweeping out the shop before shutting up when the angel of the Lord came in. I didn't know who it was at first. 'Just in time,' I said. 'What can I do for you?' Then I noticed that all about him was a red flame and a circle flame over his head, same as I've been telling you. Then he told me how the Lord had numbered his elect and the days of tribulation were at hand. 'Kill and spare not,' he said. If I'd been sleeping well for some time before this, I'd be worrying about my soul was saved or not. Well, all that night, I thought what the angel had told me. I didn't see his meaning, not at first, same as you wouldn't. Then it all came to me in a flash. 'Unworthy that I am the Lord's appointed,' said the carpenter. 'I am the sword of Israel. I am the lion of the Lord's elect.'" "And did you kill anybody?" asked Paul. "Unworthy that I smote the Philistine. In the name of the Lord of hosts, I struck off his head. It was a sign in Israel, and now I am gone into captivity, and the mirth is turned into weeping. But the Lord shall deliver me in his appointed time. Woe unto the Philistine in that day! Woe unto the uncircumcised! It were better that a stone were hanged about his neck, and he were cast into the depths of the sea." The warder rang his bell. "Inside, you two," he shouted. "Any complaints?" asked the governor on his rounds. "Yes, sir," said Paul. The governor looked at him intently. "Are you the man I put under special treatment?" "Yes, sir." "Well, then it's ridiculous to complain. What is it?" "I have reason to believe that the man I have taken to exercise with is a dangerous lunatic. Complaints by one prisoner about another can only be considered when substantiated by evidence of a warder or two other prisoners," said the chief warder. "Quite right," said the governor. "I've never heard of a more ridiculous complaint. All crime is a form of insanity. I myself chose the prisoner with whom you exercise. I chose him for his peculiar suitability. Let me hear no more on this subject, please." That afternoon, Paul spent another disquieting half-hour on the square. "I've had another vision," said the mystical homicide. "But I don't yet know quite what it portends. No doubt I shall be told." "Was it a beautiful vision?" asked Paul. "No words can describe the splendour of it. It was all crimson and wet like blood. I saw the whole prison as if it were carved of ruby, hard and glittering, and the warders and the prisoners creeping in and out like little red ladybirds. And then, as I watched, all the ruby became soft and wet, like a great sponge soaked in wine. It was dripping and melting into a great lake of scarlet. Then I woke up. I don't know the meaning of it yet, but I feel that the hand of the Lord is hanging over this prison. Do you ever feel that? As though it were built in the jaws of a beast? I sometimes dream of a great red tunnel, like the throat of a beast, and men running down it, sometimes one by one, and sometimes in great crowds, running down the throat of the beast, and the breath of the beast is like a furnace. Do you ever feel like that?" "I'm afraid not," said Paul. "Have they given you an interesting library book?" "Lady Almina's Secret," said the Lion of the Lord's elect. "Pretty soft stuff, old-fashioned too. But I keep reading the Bible. A lot of killing in that." "Dear me, you seem to think about killing a great deal." "I do. My mission, you see," said the big man simply. Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery felt very much like Solomon at 10 o'clock every evening of the week except Sundays. It was then that he sat in judgment upon the cases of misconduct among the prisoners that were brought to his notice. From this chair Colonel MacAdder had delivered sentence in undeviating accordance with the spirit and the letter of the standing orders concerning the government of His Majesty's prisons, dispensing automatic justice like a slot machine. In went the offence, out came the punishment. Not so Sir Wilfrid Lucas Dockery. Never, he felt, was his mind more alert or resourceful or his vast accumulation of knowledge more available than at his little court of summary justice. No one knows what to expect, complained warders and prisoners alike. Justice, said Sir Wilfrid, is the capacity for regarding each case as an entirely new problem. After a few months of his administration, Sir Wilfrid was able to point with some pride to the marked diminution in the number of cases brought before him. One morning, soon after Paul began on his special regime of reclamation, his companion was called up before the governor. God bless my soul, said Wilfrid. That's the man I put on special treatment. What's he here for? I was on night duty last night between the hours of 8 p.m. and 4 a.m., testified the warder in a sing-song voice, when my attention was attracted by sounds of agitation coming from the prisoner's cell. Upon going to the observation hole, I observed the prisoner pacing up and down in his cell in a state of high excitement. In one hand he held his Bible, in another a piece of wood, which he had broken from his stool. His eyes were staring, and he was breathing heavily, and sometimes muttering verses of the Bible. I remonstrated with the prisoner when he was addressed to me in terms of prejudice to good and discipline. What are the words complained of? Asked the chief warder. He called me a Moabite, an abomination of Moab, a washpot, an unclean thing, an uncircumcised Moabite, an idolater, a whore of Babylon, sir. I see. Well, what do you advise, officer? A clear case of insubordination, sir, said the chief warder. Try him on number 1 diet for a bit. But when he asked the chief warder's opinion of Sir Wilfrid was not really seeking his advice. He liked to emphasize in his own mind, and perhaps that of the prisoners, the difference between the official view and his own. What would you say to the most significant part of the evidence? He asked. The chief warder considered. I think whore of Babylon on the whole, sir. Sir Wilfrid smiled, as a conjurer may who has forced the right card. Now I, he said, am of a different opinion. It may surprise you, but I should say that the significant thing about this case was the fact that the prisoner held a piece of the stool. Destruction of prison property, said the chief warder. Yes, that's pretty bad. Now, what was your profession before conviction? Asked the governor, turning to the prisoner. Carpenter, sir. I knew it, said the governor triumphantly. We have another case of frustrated creative urge. Now listen, my man, it is very wrong for you to insult the officer, who is clearly none of the things you mentioned. He symbolizes the disapproval of society and is, like all the prisoners' staff, member of the Church of England. But I understand your difficulty. You have been used to creative craftsmanship, have you not? And you find prison life deprives you of the means of self-expression, and your energies find vent in these foolish outbursts. I will see to it that the bench and a set of carpenter tools are provided for you. The first thing you shall do is to mend the piece of furniture you so wantonly destroyed. After that we will find other work for you in your old trade. You may go. Get to the cause of the trouble, Sir Wilfrid added when the prisoners were led away. Your standing orders may repress the symptoms, but they do not probe to the underlying cause. 2 days later, the prison was in a state of intense excitement. Something had happened. Paul woke as the bell rang at the usual time, but it was nearly half an hour before the doors were unlocked. He heard the warders' slops outside, getting nearer and nearer, interjected with an occasional, "Don't ask questions, mind your own business," or a sinister, "You'll know soon enough," in reply to the prisoners' questions. They, too, had sensed something unusual. Perhaps it was an outbreak of some disease, spotted fever, Paul thought, or a national disaster in the world outside, a war or revolution. In their enforced silence, the nerves of all men were tightened to acute perception. Paul read wholesale massacres in the warder's face. "Anything wrong?" he said. "I should be bleeding well say there was wrong," said the warder. "And the next man as asks me a question is going to cop it hot." Paul began scrubbing out his cell. Dissatisfied curiosity contended in his thoughts with irritation as this interruption of routine 2 warders passed his door talking. I don't say I'm not sorry for the poor bird. All I says is it was time the governor had a lesson. Might have been one of us, said the warder in a hushed voice. Breakfast arrived and the hand appeared at his door. Paul whispered, What's happened? Well, ain't you heard? Been a murder. Shocking, bloodthirsty. Get on there, roared the warden in charge of the landing. So the governor had been murdered, thought Paul. He had been a mischievous old bore. Still, it was very disturbing for the news of a murder which was barely noticed in the gay world of trams and tubes and boxing matches, caused an ecstatic terror in this community of silent men. The interval between breakfast and chapel seemed interminable. At last the bell went, the doors opened again, they marched in silence to the chapel. As it happened, Philbrick was in the seat next to Paul. The warders sat on raised seats, watchful for any attempt at conversation. The hymn was recognized time for the exchange of gossip. Paul was waiting for it impatiently. Clearly it was not the governor who had been murdered. He stood on the chancel steps, prayer book in hand. Mr. Prendergast was nowhere to be seen. The governor conducted the service. The medical officer read the lesson, stumbling heavily over the longer words. Where was Mr. Prendergast? At last the hymn was announced. The organ struck up, played with great feeling by a prisoner who, until his conviction, had been an assistant organist at a Welsh cathedral. All over the chapel the men filled their chests with a burst of conversation. Oh God, our help in ages past, sang Paul. Where's Prendergast today? What, ain't you heard he's been done in our eternal home? Oh, Prendy went to see a chap. What said he had seen a ghost? Well, he was dippy and he got a mallet and a saw. Who let the madman have the things? The governor. Who do you think? He asked to be a carpenter. He sawed off Prendy's head. Pal of mine what lives next door, he heard it happening. The warder must have heard it too. He didn't interfere. Time like an ever-rolling stream bears all its sons away. Poor Prendy hollered fit to kill for nearly half an hour. Damn lucky it was Prendergast. Might have been you or me, the warder says, and I agree. Serves the governor right. Amen. From all points of view, it was lucky that the madman had chosen Prendergast for attack. Some people even suggested that the choice had been made in a more responsible quarter. The death of a prisoner or warder could have been called for a Home Secretary inquiry, which might have seriously discouraged the Lucas Dockery reforms and also reflected some discredit on the administration of the chief warder. Mr. Prendergast's death passed almost unnoticed. His assassin was removed to Broadmoor, and the life of the prison went on smoothly. It was observed, however, that the chief warder seemed to have more influence with his superiors than he had before. So Wilfrid concentrated his attentions upon the statistics, and the life of the prison was equally conducted under the standing orders. It was quite like it had been in old MacAdam's day, the warders observed, but Paul did not reap the benefits of this happy reversion to tradition, because some few days later he was removed with a band of others to the convict settlement at Egdon Heath. And there we shall leave it. See you tomorrow. Late.